We cannot just rubbish our African traditions because we live in a globalized society. But it's important for us to maintain our identity as Africans. And we pick the positive elements of our own cultures and traditions, and we apply them even as we live in this globalized world. And also we come up with other forms of traditions that we can be able to hand down. I want to start by asking you a very simple question. Have you ever found yourself in a place where you come from and who you are actually clash? Because this is something that I've been thinking about just recently. Because I've seen that most of the young people today, they seem not to value tradition. And they think that tradition is what those who came before us used to practice that worked then, but does not make sense today. But I want us to understand that tradition is not necessarily a bad thing. And we are not here to say that we should completely get rid of tradition, because we first and foremost have to understand what tradition is. And tradition is basically the practices, the values, and the way of life that those who were before us used to practice. And they used to make a lot of sense to them. And they used to apply the principles and the values of where they came from in their day-to-day life. And some of those practices that really makes a lot of sense to us as Africans is the values of community. And I want us to explore community for a bit, because community is at the core of who we are as Africans. I want to take a journey with you this evening. Just picture this, where you come from. Whenever there is a ceremony, for example, there's a young person out there who wants to settle down and start a family. You can actually see how members of the family come together and they help this young person in this process of becoming a responsible citizen. And also think about during those difficult seasons of life, when you lose a member of your family. You can actually see how family members come together, even as they mourn the death of their loved one. They come there and support the family. They work together with the family. And so this is one of the key elements I've seen from our tradition as Africans that really makes a lot of sense to us. And of course, I know that the generations have passed. And for me, what I know is we can actually pick some of those positive elements of tradition and apply them to our own modern lives. Because today I know that as young people, we've been able to pick some of the negative elements of tradition that comes from the Western world. And I'll give you as a very simple example. We can see the example of YOLO, for example, which I believe strongly is not an African way of life. So we see a lot of young people living like there's no tomorrow. We see a lot of young people out there having sex with everybody. It's like they do not value their bodies. They don't view their bodies as sacred. We can actually see even some of the Western ways of living that most of us as Africans have picked, and we have embraced them. It's like it is our own form of living. And it has had a very negative impact in who we are. And so I just want you to understand one thing, and that is we can actually pick some of the positive elements of our African traditions that will make a lot of sense even as we navigate the complexities of the modern world. And I've talked to you about community, which is a very important element of our tradition. We need to have support systems that even as we navigate the challenges of life, it's important for us to have a place, to have a community where we can go, where we can vent, where we can share our experiences in life. And this is very important for us because I see a lot of young people living lives in isolation, and that's why we see a lot of them struggling with mental health challenges, because they do not belong to a community. We can also pick an element of tradition, for example, like integrity. It's important for us to be people of integrity in whatever we do, in our businesses, in our careers, in whatever we find our hands to do as young people. It's important for us to be able to live with integrity. And integrity for me is what you do in the secret place is what you do also in public. That whatever you say and whatever you do align with each other. Another element of tradition that we can actually pick as young people living in this modern world is perseverance and resilience. This is a core element of African tradition that if we embrace wholly as Africans, then we can be able to go through and navigate the challenges that we find in our world today. And I know that I'm speaking to somebody who you are in a community, you are in a form of a tradition from where you come from, and you feel like in that community you are expected to conform to everything, even those things that do not make sense. And I know that some of us, we are trying to find ourselves, but we are expected to conform at the same time. I'm not also ignorant of that reality. But the thing that I've realized is, because tradition was started by people like you and I, then I believe that because people change, because people evolve, then I am a strong believer that tradition also evolves. That even as we go through life, we can be able to pick those positive elements, like I have said before, and be able to apply them in our own modern world. We can be able to come up with traditions of our own that will make sense to us in this day and age. And so, what I'm saying on this episode is that it's important for us not to get rid of our African traditions, because our traditions are what those who came before us left for us as an inheritance. And it's our responsibility to also pick up and apply some of these principles in our own personal lives, and also come up with positive traditions in our own lives that we can be able to hand down to those who will come after us in terms of legacy. And so even as we come to the tail end of this episode, I want us to understand that we cannot completely get rid of the fact that we are Africans. And we cannot just rubbish our African traditions because we live in a globalized society. But it's important for us to maintain our identity as Africans. And we pick the positive elements of our own cultures and traditions, and we apply them even as we live in this globalized world. And also we come up with other forms of traditions that we can be able to hand down to those who will come after us. And I hope this episode has been of value to you. And if that is the case, then do not hesitate to share with a friend who is in a space where they do not know how to balance between how to be an African and how to follow African traditions and also remain true to who they are. I have been Nganga Gashie, your host, and thank you, and until next time, it's goodbye for now.